Hello, and welcome to POMA DOes, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine in Pennsylvania for our members and their patients. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, so we're going to talk about parliamentary procedure, the Parliamentary Primer today. I'm going to introduce our panel today. Dr. Jessica Masser is our Vice Speaker of the House of Delegates. Katie Graham, DO, is on the POMA Board of Trustees, as is Jeremiah Kinsey, OMS 2 now, OMS 2, and he's the student representative to the POMA Board of Trustees. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about something that can be a little bit intimidating to people that are starting out in the board. You worry about, is it my turn to talk? What do I say? When do I say it? There's a motion on the floor. What do I do? We're going to talk about parliamentary procedure. We're going to talk about how things get done. At first, we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of the POMA. The POMA is set up with a House of Delegates. The House of Delegates is the legislative body of the POMA. We set the policies. We determine the amount that somebody's going to pay for dues. We determine who are going to be the leaders of the organization. The organization moves forward. We determine what is going to be our stance on certain issues that go on in the world. And then because the House of Delegates only meets once a year, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in between meetings. So we have the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees is more an executive entity where the president chairs the Board of Trustees, and the officers are all on the executive committee. And a lot of the debate and a lot of the things that go on in between the House of Delegates meetings to keep the organization running smoothly and functioning well is done at the level of the Board of Trustees. And then, of course, the Board of Trustees is broken down into task forces and committees, and then they work individually on certain things that the president or the Board of Trustees has decided that a committee needs to work on. Standing committees such as the Finance Committee, the Executive Committee, the Bylaws Committee. It's pretty obvious what they do, but sometimes we'll have other committees formed and then they'll serve a function. So that's kind of the layout of how the POMA is structured from a governance standpoint. Now, Jess, you've actually been a president of a board of trustees of an organization, our POFPS. You've served as president for 2 years, and you had the task of running those meetings of the board of trustees of the POFPS. How did you find that? What was that? Was that a difficult thing? Was it something that you felt you were prepared for, or things that we could help people to be better prepared for going into something like that?
I think I was fairly fortunate that I worked my way up through committees at my hospital. So I started as just members of some of the regular committees, and then I've worked my way up to being a chair of a very large, very high functioning committee at our institution. So I kind of got used to the process a little bit in more of an environment that wasn't maybe so intimidating. And whether you're running a local meeting or you're running the House of Delegates or you're running the board, it's the same procedure or policies. It may not be quite as strict or quite as detailed, but it's the same general concept. So I think once I started to get a little bit involved, it made things a little bit easier because the words were familiar, the kind of way things worked is familiar, and I just had the great opportunity. And then I've been kind of trying to work and listen to a lot of you guys through the years, run things. And again, it's the same words, it's the same terms. And I think what's important is making sure that everybody there, you may speak out of turn, or you may ask to do something that's not the right time. And most people are very willing to help you. Or even if you're chairing the meeting, there's usually somebody there that knows Robert's rules very well and can kind of say, that's not quite the time for that. And as long as you're willing to listen and take the advice, I think it's something that is exciting. It's a way that you can have your voice and have your constituents' voice. So I found just working through the process from the bottom up helped me a ton.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because the different levels of governance have different rules that govern them. When that main deliberative body, because there are so many people there and there's so much going on, the rules have to be followed and they need to be followed strictly. And the rules on debate: a motion is made, a motion is seconded, and then the motion is opened for debate. And in a large body like that, the rules of debate are: everyone has an opportunity to speak at the most twice on one issue in one day. And unless it's otherwise delineated, the time limit for that speaking twice is 10 minutes. But there's one little rule also in there: is no one gets to speak a second time until everyone's had their first chance. And you'll see Speaker Morrison do that quite a bit at the AOA House of Delegates, and Dr. Broder. They're excellent at saying, you've had your chance, you said your piece, I have other people who want to go first, and then you will have an opportunity to go second if you still have things to say. Now, when you get to something like the Board of Trustees, it's a little bit different. Board of Trustees is actually run more like a committee than it is a large deliberative body like a House of Delegates, because there are fewer people and things really need to be debated and hashed out and talked about. So the debate limits are usually a little bit less stringent. And the chair or the president usually really likes to let those people have their chance to say what they need to say. And then committees are structured that way. Everyone gets to talk almost as much as they want until either everyone's done talking or someone calls for the question, and then things move forward that way. Jeremiah, with being the president of SOMA down in Philadelphia, are you guys having regular meetings? Do you guys have debate? Do you guys bring up motions, things to do? How are your meetings run? I've actually never attended one.
Yeah, so our local chapter, we don't really do debates and things as such, but we recently went down to DC for myself and my VP and National Liaison Officer. Went down to DC and it's ran similarly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty intense environment.
It
is.
Can
be, but I mean, we're trying to get things done. So
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And Congress is a whole different set of rules. They follow parliamentary procedure, but there are special rules that the House of Legislation and the Senate have that no one else bothers to deal with because they're just so absolutely complex. Katie, you've been to the House of Delegates for POMA. You've been to the Board of Trustee meetings. You've been on committee meetings through Zoom and in person. Do you have questions about the structure, about how things get done at the different levels?
I don't think so. I think it's, as you alluded to earlier, it's nice to see how things kind of, as you move, I guess, up the chain in terms of going from, committees and task force to the Board of Trustees, that things kind of funnel down, get narrowed down. So a lot of the, I guess, sideways chatter goes away. And I think that really helps with, the being able to expedite things through those meetings.
Yeah, and you're right. That's one of the best things that we have at POMA is we want to get people involved. We want to find ways to get more people involved in the process through committees, through task forces, and then on the Board of Trustees and as a separate entity coming to the House of Delegates and representing your district there, and then taking that forward and moving that into the AOA and going to the AOA House of Delegates and then their reference committees and seeing how all that works, because it really is. I mean, Jeremiah, you talk about being down in Washington. You went from 0 to 1 million in a day. We're talking about gradual steps, and it's that kind of thing that really kind of piqued my interest in what's the right way to do it. How do you make sure that the majority rules, but yet the minority is heard? What they don't agree to, they've at least had the opportunity to say why they don't agree and voice their opinion on it. And those are the rules that we follow, and they're phenomenal rules. And I really encourage people to learn as much about them as they can, because it will help you in everything. Your kid's Little League booster committee, and it's just going to be spinning off the rails, and you're going to be able to say, well, let's kind of just organize this a little bit differently. And then you take it all the way up. And then when the representative for the state of Texas, Jeremiah Kinsey's sitting in Congress, and he knows the rules, he's figured it all out. So we want to help people to move through those different levels. And what do you see, and I'm going to go back to you, Katie, What do you see as things that we could do to get people more interested, to take away the mystique? Because sometimes I feel people come to these meetings and don't want to speak because they're afraid that they're going to be out of place, out of turn. What kind of things can we do to help them to understand that while you may not be right, someone might gently say that's not the time or place, but they're going to let you come back to when it is the time or place? What are ways that we could convey that to physicians that are coming into the process now?
I think I have a unique perspective on things because I just transitioned as from the young physician representative on the POMA board to a trustee at large. And I think just one of the things that I noticed was I think it's really important, for young attendings to have an introduction to the board, because a lot of the committees that, however your residency program is set up, whether or not you're sitting on the committees as part of, meeting your ACGME milestones, or if you're doing it another way, we as residents are not really, that's not part of our education. I think a new orientation for new board members is important, but really getting involved with your local POMA chapters, I think is important, because then you can figure out kind of what's important or where the board is kind of looking at things to take action on, and you can make changes by being elected to committees right from there.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we need to do more at lifting the curtain and letting people see behind the curtain and introduce them to what the Board of Trustees is, what the House of Delegates is. And I think actually the House of Delegates might even be even easier because so many delegates from each district can come. And I think we really need to be encouraging the newer physicians, the newer attendings, to come to those house and see what's going on and talk to trustees and talk to people who have been there for a while and kind of lift that curtain a little bit. I think that you're right on with that.
I will say that one thing that I found interesting was with SOMA or SOMA, we had workshops beforehand, and they taught us about Robert's rules, and they gave us pamphlets. And I think having that access to the rules and also the familiarity with the environment and our colleagues allowed us to speak more about issues.
Right. I think that's so important. When you're comfortable and you're not trying to figure out the playing field, it's easier to be part of the game, so to speak. So yeah, that's great to hear that PCOM is, giving you some of that education on the rules and parliamentary procedure. Jess, with the residents, you work so much with the residents. Are they involved in committees at the hospital? Are they exposed to any of this? I mean, they're spending so much time learning medicine. So
it's technically a requirement for graduation, but to be honest, they need to attend 3 committee meetings over the course of 3 years, which isn't very much. And much like anything else, there are some committees that function monthly at a high level with a lot of agenda items to get through. Like I chair P&T. It's very complicated. It has lots of moving pieces. We do a lot of work for the hospital. That one, I think if you were present at, you would see a full meeting. There was other meetings I sat on as a resident where if we met once a quarter, it was shocking. Rules weren't followed at all. We didn't really, it was a committee, but not. So yes, the residents are required to get exposure to committees, but I think people can leave there with very different experiences based on the committee they sit on, or honestly, how much they want to be a part of it, particularly now that these are mostly on Zoom. I'm not even sure they sometimes have the cameras on and the microphones on. So they're there. I'm just not sure if they get any of the pickup of what the purpose of the meetings are. So we're trying to do that. Another thing they have to technically do before they graduate is advocacy work. So every year we try to have an advocacy lecture and kind of give over some basics. And again, we have some people that do a wonderful job of it and others, it's not their thing and they move on. So.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to get some experience. And again, what they will want from it, they'll get from it. And those are the ones that we want to try and identify as moving forward in leadership positions. That's kind of almost a weeding out of if that's not what you're interested in, that's fine. Not everyone is. Does anybody have any questions about structural things and also advancing, exposing folks to the processes? Are there any questions or any other comments about any of that?
I think it's super important what Katie had mentioned is I don't know of a district who is not looking for people to get involved. So, my district happens to be a fairly active district, and we're still looking for people. So I think anybody can realize that if you feel slightly intimidated to come out to Valley Forge, or next year it'll be somewhere different, you can literally just start with your local people. They can help you. There's people there that are willing to take you through the process, teach you how, and even if you have a complaint, a question, or a concern, you can at least bring it up at your district and it can get filtered up. So I think it's very important what she said to, POMA wants to hear what their people need and want and are looking for it. And however you can get there, I think you guys are pretty open to listening.
And I think it's also important to don't be put off if you don't get the answer that you thought you should get right from the start. If someone says, well, that's an interesting problem, you should take that to POMA. Well, how do I take that to POMA? And if you have a question about that, reach out to someone that you feel that you can converse with a little bit differently than the answer that you just got, because that should never be the answer. The answer should be, you should take that to POMA and here's how I think you should do it, because that's all part of the learning curve. So we're three of us are heading out to Chicago for the AOA House of Delegates, and it'll be quite a setup. There's going to be several hundred doctors from all over the country and all specialty colleges that are going to be there. And we're going to be deliberating and debating multiple policy positions that go forward. Actually, POMA is putting a resolution in, and that's what it's going to go up as. It's going to go up as a resolution. A resolution, in the first part of it, it's the whereas is what you hear people talk about, but what it's really called is the preamble. The preamble explains why you want to do what you want to do, and then you get to the resolves, and the resolution itself is here's why I want to do it. Now here's what I want to do, and this is how I think we should move forward. And what's really important when you're preparing a resolution is you need to talk about why you want to do it. But then the resolution itself, the resolves, you really want to limit that. You want it to be something. You don't want it to be some things, because what can happen is you might get people that support this one, but they don't support that one, and they don't support the third one. And then it's getting split up, or it's all getting voted down, but yet there was something good in there. So you really want to focus on something when you write a resolution, and bring that something forward and let it be debated, discussed, and then voted on. So most of our resolutions, all of the resolutions to the AOA House of Delegates, have to be submitted in advance. They are going to be discussed in committee. And then the committee will come back to the House of Delegates and tell the House how they feel that motion should move forward. Most of the resolutions get passed by unanimous consent. Does everybody agree? Okay, everybody agrees. Great. And then you'll have, in each of the committees, you'll have 5 to 10 resolutions that are going to be debated. And they're going to be debated pretty well. And you'll get the experience, and the motion comes from the committee. It's automatically seconded because the committee is putting it forward, and then the committee will then make its recommendation. We recommend passage of this, and then there'll be call for debate, and you'll get up and you'll have your opportunity to speak and say what it is that you feel about this motion. And if you do that, if you choose to speak, stand at the microphone and speak, the first thing that you should do is identify yourself, identify the delegation that you're with, and you should say that you're for or against the resolution. So, Mr. Speaker, Jeff Dunkelberger, Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association, I rise in support of resolution 2022-4. And then you say why. And that way, Speaker Morrison or Vice Speaker Broder, they know who you are, they know where you're from, and they know what position you're coming from. And so does the rest of the body. And then say your part. And then occasionally you'll hear someone say, and I yield back. You don't need to yield back. You're not giving back any of your time. Once you're done speaking, if you're under the 10 minutes, you're under the 10 minutes. I yield back is one of those special things that the House of Representatives use, because they actually are given a space of time for their caucus, and they can use it or not use it and yield it back. But there's no need to yield back the portion of your time when you're done. You just say thank you and go back and listen to the other people speak. And then you might want to offer an amendment, and you say, Mr. Speaker, Dunkelberger, Pennsylvania, I offer amendment to the resolution, and you state what the amendment is. Someone has to second that, and then debate begins on the amendment. And then you can have an amendment to the amendment. So that's a second level amendment. And with the second level amendment, that will be seconded and that will be debated as its own. And you cannot go to a third level amendment. You can only talk to the second level, and that needs to be resolved and they're voted upon. And then you go to the main amendment, and that needs to be voted on. And then you go back to the motion. And you can go back to first level amendments, second level amendments throughout the entire process. But when you're at a second level amendment and everyone's tired of talking about it, and the same thing is being said over and over again, you'll hear someone stand up and say, "Mr. Speaker, Dunkelberger, Pennsylvania, I call all previous questions." When that happens, the speaker takes a vote. If 2/3 of the body requests or approves that they want to hear all previous questions, everything is voted on and you move to the next question. You'll hear that quite a bit because a lot of the motions, the debate goes on, and sometimes the same things will be said over and over again, and we need to move on because we need to get things done. So that's how most of all of that will happen. But at any time, you can feel free to stand up and speak to a motion or an amendment or amendment to the amendment, and don't feel that you're out of place. You'll hear people point of order. They might feel that the temperature isn't right in the house, and point of order, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that the air conditioning's on. It's 90 degrees and it's hot in here. And the speaker will decide whether or not he wants to do anything about that right then and there. Point of information, what time are we going to do this? So these are all things that you'll hear people stand up and speak to, and you can kind of learn from each one of those. It's a fun time. It's a long day. Friday is a shorter day. Unless you're on a committee, then it ends up being a long day. Saturday is a long day for everyone. Sunday, it's hit or miss, depends on whether or not we get everything done. You'll also see the elections of the officers, and that's a great time to see the things that are changing at the AOA. I've rambled on here now for the last 10 or 15 minutes about the processes that go on at the House of Delegates. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I think it's important too that, to your point, if you ever want to say something traditionally, and I'm sure you might get into this, traditionally Pennsylvania has a lot of their discussion, which I like to think of as mom and dad discussing things behind the doors. And then when we go out to the floor of the House of Delegates, we traditionally have kind of spoken about everything at our caucus meeting and kind of have a stance of where we feel Pennsylvania stands. And if for some reason you have a different point, like Jeff had said, that you want to say something, and maybe it is different than what Pennsylvania say, you always have the ability to say, "Speaking for myself." And
Right.
that means that you are totally allowed to say whatever your feelings about the item is. Traditionally, Pennsylvania, again, we're a big state, and we do try to hash out a lot of the details during the caucus meetings that we have. So that's where you can answer any questions, ask anything, debate. We do a lot of that on some of the more in-depth resolutions. But again, like he says, you're always welcome. If you're not speaking on behalf of Pennsylvania, you just say, "I'm speaking for myself," and you can say whatever your thoughts are or your concerns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We encourage that. So, that's parliamentary procedure in a real thumbnail sketch. It's how things are going to happen. You'll get to the committee meetings. The committee meetings can be really knocked down, drag out fights sometimes. There's a lot of things that go on at committee meetings, and it's great. The process happening. I say it all the time. It's sausage being made. And, it's a terrific way to move things forward and get everyone's opinion out that wants to have their opinion heard, and then make a vote on it. The thing that everyone needs to take away from it is the vote's not always going to go your way, but you were heard. Your point was discussed. Your point was taken seriously. Unfortunately, not the majority of people didn't agree with it, and that's okay too. Pennsylvania has lost a couple of battles, and things that we really supported and thought were very important that other people didn't, and that's okay. We said our piece. We know we were heard, and then things went forward. So I think that's really important. I'm really done with Parliamentary Primer, as POMA asked us to call this. I'm going to ask each of you if anything else to say to add to this. Again, I told you guys in the beginning I could sit and talk about parliamentary procedure for 4 hours, but that's just the nerd in me.
We love the nerd in you.
Thank you. Jess, do you have anything else that you want to add to the discussion?
No, just to say, if anybody's interested in getting involved, please welcome. Give us a shout out. We're always looking for new ideas.
Right. Katie, anything to add?
No, I would just echo what Jess said. I represent District 12, go us. So please reach out, get involved.
Jeremiah?
I'm excited about our upcoming AOA delegates, House of Delegates meeting.
That's-
And if any students are listening to this and want to get involved, reach out to me and Soma. And yeah.
And Jeremiah, I'm going to extend an offer to you that if at any time you would entertain having me come down and talk to Soma at PCOM, and if this gets listened to by any of our LECOM students with LECOM Soma, if you ever want me to come out and sit and talk about parliamentary procedure and even moving up through the ranks of the various organizations. I've been part of POMA for pushing 20 years now, and it's just an awesome organization and it's fun to do. So I'm here for you. I'm here to help with anything that I can with you guys. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to close off and say, go DOs.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.